While the thing that in the episode told us is that there is a lot more going on with Delaney than we think. Hey, this is Cameron for Taboo, episode 2, and I guess they're not having episode titles anymore. It's kind of strange that they call the first episode Shovels and Keys, and then they just kind of stopped. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about the title of the episode and judge my feelings on that, but I was definitely looking forward to this episode overall. I definitely enjoyed episode 1. I know a lot of people said it was very slow. I was fine with that because it was the first episode. You know, it's going to be slow. There's a lot of exposition to tell. There's a lot going on. I was completely fine with that. I thought they set up the story pretty well. I thought Tom Hardy was really good. So I was definitely interested in seeing where the second episode would take us. And I have to say, after watching the second episode, yeah, I'm kind of starting to get the complaints with this show, because don't get me wrong, I still really like this episode. I think there were some fantastic standout moments here. I think we introduced some potentially very interesting characters, but it was very overlong. There was a little bit too much going on, and I get that they have 8 episodes, but I think a lot of what happened here they could have easily saved for later down the road. But let's just get into this episode, because I do want to talk about it overall. There's a lot that happened in this episode, more than I think should have happened, but let's just get into it. So we start off where we see one of Stuart's men goes to him, and he works for him. He throws a paper at him and tells him to pick it up, then tells him that he has no problem with the principles of obeying him, just the execution of Delaney, and he told him to take care of it, and the man says it's just taking a bit longer than he anticipated, and Stuart says if he were to open that ball of paper, he'll notice of his dismissal from the East India dated 2 days hence, and only Delaney's death will render it obsolete. So you see throughout this episode that Sir Stuart is getting quite impatient now that Delaney has declined their offer. He really wants nothing to do with him, and he just kind of wants to burn Delaney at the stake and do whatever he can to kill him. So Delaney goes to the cemetery and digs through the dirt with a shovel. He then goes back to Brace and brings back what he found, which is a briefcase that he took to keep things hidden, which is understandable. As we know, he wants to make sure that his family property is just that, his family's property and nothing else, and you can see that he's doing whatever he can to take any sort of trinkets or anything he finds and try to hide as best he can. And I think that's something that I really do like about Delaney, is how dedicated he is to his family. That is definitely something that I'm getting from his character that I'm definitely enjoying. But Delaney then hands him a gun, and Brace tells him to go to hell. Delaney says if he marches with Tremaine, he will march with him, and Brace asks to where and for what purpose. And Delaney says that it's for the purpose of staying alive right now. He tells him he may choose to leave at any point if he wants to, and Brace then takes the gun. Delaney tells him to hand it into the meat locker and just keep the powder out of the steam. He then talks about what he said to him about his father rarely eating, and Brace says that he lived on air and honey beer from a man in Featherland since it was cheaper than the tavern and Horace only gave him coppers. And Delaney asks who the man was, and Brace says he has since died and his wife has since left, and he asks why he wants to know, and Delaney says because he's more generous than his father, and he tells him from now they will drink beer only from bottles and wine from flasks, and that's all. So I do like the way that Brace is kind of his most trusted confidant, and really the only person that kind of shows Delaney respect, and is really the only person that sees Delaney as not just a ghost, but as an actual human being, and that's something that Delaney in general hasn't really received from basically anyone since he's returned. So Delaney then finds a bag filled with minerals and many valuable crystals, and he hides it into the safe, and here's where we get to my problem with the episode. There are way too many scenes just like that. That's just Delaney rummaging through papers, or Delaney rummaging through minerals, and after a while it just gets really tiring. It really does. We'll get more into that in a second, but he goes to an auction for sailing ships and merchant vessels, and he bids 800 pounds for a ship. I mean, pretty crazy, but obviously he's going to do what he can to try to trade the ship, and Wilton was about to get it, who sees him in disgust. It's probably one of the worst people you could see right now, because as we know, Stuart wants his head out of stake, and basically Delaney makes sure it goes to their trading company, and Wilton sees him in disgust, and basically Delaney makes, Wilson then meets with Appleby and tells him about how Delaney plans to use the ship for trade, and he's planning to reopen the trading post to assert his ownership, and he should be hanged for treason because of it. And they go to Sir Stuart, who's growing quite impatient about what to do with Delaney, and he questions why Delaney would even give a look at their offer and defy logic, and the king and Wilton says he thinks he's simply trying to raise the price. Stewart asks how he knew so much about the border negotiations and how did he know where they were placing again, because as we know, Delaney was gone. He's been in Africa for many years. How did he know all this knowledge? And the location's a state secret. Where do you get the money to buy a ship? None of this stuff is really adding up, and he quickly sees neither of them have an answer for any of his questions. He asks him if he's the only one in the company with a brain. He then comes up with an idea that must have gotten to him either first in Africa, London. One of their agents approached him, briefed him, and gave him money and secured his services, and when Wilson asks who it was, Stewart says that it was the fucking Americans. And yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that we start to see here, that Delaney, while he might have been in Africa, he may also possibly be a spy for the Americans, and we're going to get into that, but Delaney then sees a paper in the mill that says the name Atticus on it, and he goes into the barn, calls out for him. This scene is kind of just there to give Delaney back his horse, and it's this long, drawn-out scene where Atticus tells him, we'll give him back his horse or whatever, and basically he tells him a story about how there was this man who basically wanted to kill his father, and he obviously said no because he was very tight with Horace at the time, and basically, he tells him that, okay, if you're going to give me back my horse, you can give it back to me. I will give you the money that you want, because there's a lot of money this father owes him because of how Atticus spared him from being killed, and he never got that money. So basically, Delaney tells him, okay, I'll give you that money, but in exchange, you have to basically be an informant for me. You need to know what's going on with the East India Company, because obviously he's after them, and I do like the way that he's assembling an army. I think Delaney is very good with doing that, and he's very good with appealing to other people. That's something we definitely do see here. And my favorite line probably from this scene, though, one of my favorite lines the entire episode is when Atticus asks him, basically throughout the episode, well, not throughout the episode, but throughout this conversation, I mean, he's talking about how he wants to write this book, and it's kind of a funny scene because he asked him what the biggest thing in the world he saw was, but when he asked him what the smallest thing he ever saw was, Delaney says human kindness, which, as we know, Delaney hasn't received much of. It kind of seems dead to him, and that's something that Delaney, I think, really does miss, is kind of the kindness that everyone has, which is there right now. So Solomon Coop, who is the private secretary to the Sovereign, goes to see the Prince Regent, and he's just injured his toe. This scene was honestly pretty funny. I thought they did a good job with adding some humor to this, because the Prince Regent is about as whiny and demanding as a prince could possibly be, and he's someone that I could see getting really annoying, but for right now, I found to be quite funny. I mean, he's complaining about how, why are the Americans red, he's basically complaining about everything. I mean, he's complaining about the fact that the Admiralty drew the ship. He's blaming him for it, and he tells him about this dream that he had last night, that he was driving in the North Sea, and his body was England. He was an island, all these shrimps with bows, and they were flying into his flesh, and basically he says it wasn't just a dream, it was a premonition that ships are the American ships, and he tells him he's lying in the ocean like a whale. No one in his Privy Council will raise a musket barrel, and he sails as close to his nose, a gang of classless rebels, and basically how all his allies are completely cowardly, and he doesn't really care about most of them, and how he's running out of patience, and he tells him to tell the Admiralty that although the gossips say that all he wants is flowers and waltzes, in truth, he also demands the American ships be sunk, the survived hanged, and the bodies drowned nailed to church walls of an island to stop their bells making common calls, and Coop asks if he wants to write this down. Prince Regent says yes, tells him to fuck the East India Company over as well, and Coop says that he intends to. So I like that Coop is not really with the East India Company. He is in fact against them, and it shows that while Sir Stewart is definitely in charge, there is definitely a larger party at play, and of course that being Prince Regent. I mean, he's the one with all the power right now, and I like the direction that this is going. This is very interesting stuff overall, especially the whole thing with us knowing that, a war is going on. I do like that that is a side story, that we know the war is still there. So Delaney then sees this woman come out of the shadows, and this was very interesting. Her name is Winter, who despite living with the whores is actually herself a virgin, and he asks why she's following him, and she says that it's to save his life, says that Helga gave information to a man with a silver tooth. She spies on her from the conversation. He meant to do her harm, and she knew it, and she wants him dead so she can have her rooms back, and Delaney asks how old she is, and Winter says 13, and he asks why she keep her and not rent her. Winter says because she's too ugly, and she tells her one day she'll catch a man, carry her away, someone like him, and she says she spied him too, and he says to tell him about the man with the silver tooth, and she says she can show him where he's moored if he wants to. They go onto a boat to find him, and this is basically the central mystery of this episode, is who is this man with the silver tooth, who is out to get Delaney, and Delaney asks her if he sleeps on the ship alone. She says that he takes a particular girl aboard, and basically does mean things, but there's no one else, and tells him that who they say he was in Africa, and he starts to picture her as a possible slave girl that he might have done harm to. And this is another problem that I do have with the show. I'm going to talk about it later, but this is definitely a problem that I think the show is starting to have, and that I think it's just a little bit too subtle, honestly. I mean, it's very easy to tell what's going on here. It's almost like the show is afraid of really saying what's going on here. I mean, it's pretty easy to tell that he was a slave owner, and he probably did some harm to slaves, definitely. You can very well tell that, and we don't need all these scenes with him constantly picturing slave. It's getting a bit annoying, I gotta say. And episode 2, I shouldn't be saying that, but there's so much of it in this episode that it honestly is kind of starting to annoy me that the show won't just tell us, and they're not just telling us what's actually going on. It's kind of annoying, but basically, she tells him the current there heads for Gravesend, and he asks if she knows navigation. She says since they want to be sailors and they find a ship, he gets off the ship. She asks him why he even believes she's telling the truth, and he says because. She asks what he's going to do. He says he will ask him why he's sent to kill him and by who, and he tells her to stay. He swims out to the ship, and I think the real reason that he trusts her was because she's really the only one who's actually genuinely helped him and isn't there just to warrant his death. So I think just because the fact she actually showed him some kindness, again, that's something that he really does appreciate, and because that, I think that's really why he trusted her. So we then get, I think, this very unnecessary scene where he roams around the ship, and this goes on for about 4 minutes long. Again, there's so many scenes like this. He sets it ablaze, he goes back to the boat, and I'm not quite sure why he set it on fire. There really wasn't any reason to do that. I mean, if this man wants to kill you, I don't think the way to, subdue him is to set his ship to fire. That's probably not the best thing to do. Again, I mean, I don't make the rules, but, if you think that's the right thing to do, then whatever. But he returns, and then Winter has vanished, and we don't hear about Winter throughout the rest of the episode. So the question is Winter real, or is this just someone that Delaney is hallucinating in, like, a way to gain him allies? You don't really know what's going on there. So Brace then goes to give him food the next morning. He tells him that he has the very same smell as his father's clothes when he would go dancing on the foreshore and light his fires, and Delaney asks him where his father kept his most important things. Brace asks what he's looking for, and Delaney says a Nuka Sound tree that may be written on deerskin, and Brace says he's asking him if he has any idea where he can find his own death warrant, and Delaney says he may have to prove to a tribunal that the land was acquired by treaty and not by conquest, or the crown may try to seize it to claim it was a spoil of war. So he knows, obviously, of the dangers that this mission intends. There's definitely a lot of dangers that are in the way, definitely, and Brace tells him he has no deerskin tree, nor has he seen theories of water spreads, but what he does have are Malay coins, enough to bury him prayer beads, but not enough to get him to heaven, and hashish enough to ease his grieving when the East India Company slits his throat, which of course we know they will because they're warranting his death. And Delaney says that something in Africa, we keep hearing him say things in African, we don't really know what he's saying, but Brace tells him he has appointments today and breakfast will be here in half an hour. Delaney then sees a vision of the same ghost woman he saw in the window last episode. I have no idea what that's about. That's like a whole other layer to the show that I'm sure is going to be explored later, but I don't know what's going on there. He opens up a drawer, he goes through many of Horace's files, and he then finds a flyer for a play called The Painted Savage, which was helmed by the actress Lorna Bowe. Now, we'll get into Lorna a little bit later, but she definitely is one of the more compelling characters to come out of this show besides Delaney, which I'll talk about why that's a problem. But he goes to the whorehouse and he meets with Helga, and he asks her if she has a girl there called Winter, and Helga says that he can have any girl he wants, but she doesn't have a girl of that name. So again, we don't know if Winter's actually real. Delaney thinks that this is Helga's daughter and that she's just trying to, keep her as close to her as possible because she's her daughter, and that's why she's not renting her out to any men. So he thinks he knows what's going on, but in reality, we don't really know what's going on there. So basically, he talks about how secrets to him are like weapons, and she says she would very much like to talk business. But here's the thing, I mean, you think secrets are weapons, why are you holding so many secrets then? Why not just tell people how you're feeling? I mean, that kind of contradicts who Delaney really is by him saying that secrets are like weapons. But she would like him, and she talks about how she still wants to have sex with him. We know that Helga basically just wants him to fuck her, but basically he says he needs to know where Mr. Silvertooth is hiding, her new friend. She says she will ask after the Malay, and he thanks her for her help and he leaves. He goes onto a ship that he just recently purchased and finds something under the floorboards. He starts speaking African, strips completely naked, sees another memory, what looks like slaves he chained up in a cellar. Again, I have no idea what this scene is really doing here. It just kind of felt like it was here to, one, give Tom Hardy nudity, I guess, two, again, just add to the mysterious part of the show, and it doesn't add to anything. It just drags the episode on, and again, I just felt like it really did not need to be here. But he then goes back to Brace and he asks where he's been. He says he set a fire in his room for the mice, and Delaney says in Parliament today they'll be debating the beating of servants. The Whigs want to protect him, and he believes that would lead to anarchy. And Brace says he's never hungry, and Delaney says he ate in the whorehouse, and Brace says to qualify his food it needs to be solid, and he says he made some coffee that's stone cold by now. Brace asks where he's going now. Delaney says someone has been brought in London to try and kill him, and he wants to try to speak to them and seek them out, basically, know what's going on there. So he goes to a hospital, and we then get introduced to, definitely, again, one of the more compelling characters that the show has given us. So he meets with Dr. Edgar Dumbarton, who is played by Michael Kelly from House of Cards, which is really cool to see him on here, and he is the first American character on the show. I like that we actually have an American character because America is a big part of this show, as we know. So the nun tells him to go inside. He goes into the orphanage and finds Dumbarton on his break. He tells me he has a wound in his left shoulder, and Dumbarton asks if it's a bullet wound. Delaney says it's splinter from the mast of a ship called the Yankee Prize, and he was struck by a Yankee ball, and Dumbarton really is not falling for it at all. He knows there's definitely more going on, and Dumbarton puts on his glasses as he doesn't know how God makes his colors, but he's pursuing them, and we learn that he actually is a flag maker. He's, three things. He's a doctor, a merchant, and a spy. And Dumbarton says unless he tells him who sent him, he will have to ask him to leave at the point of a gun. And Delaney says it was a man who called himself Colonnade. And Dumbarton asks if he's not yet in hell. Delaney says that it was Point de Galda in the Azores. And Dumbarton says that he should know by now a wound in the shoulder is no longer used by them as a signal. And they change when they think that perhaps the British have overtaken it. So Delaney says he doesn't trust the name Colonnade. And Dumbarton asks what he wants. Delaney says he wants to line a conference with the president of 15 states of America. He says who he is, and Dumbarton says that name means nothing, and Delaney says it will to the president and his representatives who are traveling to negotiations in Ghent, and he says the border between the United States and Canada is being drawn up in a very quiet, closed room, and says he has something of great value to their nation, something the British, as we know, are trying to kill him for. So Dumbarton asks if he seeks protection. Delaney says he has demands and that he tells Carlsbad his name, and Dumbarton asks who that is. Delaney says he's the head of the American Society of Secret Correspondence in London, and he says that name because Colonnade told him if he was drunk and was trying to push his jelly up a whore, and Carlsbad will know his name and business. So Dumbarton pulls out a gun, again, not for a second believing anything he's saying. He says he has used the wrong words, tells him to get out, and Delaney says he treats sickness in the mind. Dumbarton tells him to keep walking, says he's mad to have even come there. They're an angry nation, and Delaney says he's counting on it. He bids him good day, so he did not get through to him at all, unfortunately. But unlike the other scenes, I actually really do like where Dumbarton is headed, because it actually is leading us to something to build on. I'm interested in seeing where that's going to go. So then we see Zilpha, who the show finally remembers. Zilpha so far is the character that I just kind of feel like is here, but she finds a letter containing a diamond, and for some reason Delaney has sent her one of the diamonds. I don't know why, but he sent one to her. He then meets with Thoit, who says he intends to begin by reading his father's last will and testament. Then he shall try to reason with his creditors and ask him if he's decided what he will do with Nuka. And Delaney says that he will use it for trade, and he talks about the ship he bought, and they discovered it was formerly used for carrying slaves and was once owned by the East India Company. So Thoit says they don't really deal slaves, and Delaney says they don't, but they do run cloth and trade beads to Tangier through the Scarf family, and then slaves to Trinidad from Banks Island through Spanish privateers, and he says for one with such close connections, he's surprised that he doesn't know. And Thoit asks what connections, and Delaney says he has been his father's lawyer for the past 40 years, which, again, this didn't make sense to me. Delaney met Thoit last episode, or at least it seemed that way. It looked like in the first episode this was the first time they had met, because Delaney did not recognize Thoit. So how the hell does he know that Thoit is his father's lawyer for 40 years? It just feels very underwritten, and it's something the show glances over, and it seems like it's not that big of an error, but it actually is. It just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. How is he gone for so long, and he has this knowledge? That in general, again, maybe that will get revealed, but right now it really just feels very, very underwritten and very contradictory to what we saw last week. So he talks about how he's reported every detail from his most intimate business to every detail of the East India Company, and he was there, whore the same as almost everyone else in those city, apart from those who were actually labeled as such. And Thoy tells him when he left London, the East India was a trading company. Now it is God Almighty. The Prince Regent fears it, and no government in the world dares to stand up to it, just because of how powerful they really are. And that's understandable. I mean, look at how many people are in the East India Company. Hell, Thoy is a member of the East India Company, so you can understand why everyone's so fearful of it. Even the princes, and it owns the land, the ocean, the fucking sky above their heads. It has more men and weapons and ships than all the Christian nations combined. He thinks all submit are evil, but they are submitting to the way the world has become. He says all the good men in London who fight them are washed up at Tilbury, and they could hold a congress, and Delaney says they would simply board a ship, sail to Boston, where the company would never go, and Thoy says they can add treason to the list, says the king and company above his head. Thoy tells him about how Horace didn't pay any bills for 4 years, and they feel deeply aggrieved and talk of seizures, and he asks if he's armed, which Delaney says he is, and they then go to the courthouse, and this is when things get really good. The last, 15 minutes of this episode are genuinely great. I really did love the last 10 to 15 minutes here, but they go to the courthouse, and tons of people are there, once again, making fun of Horace. Very similar to last week's scene, but it wasn't as intimate, it wasn't as psychological as last scene was. This one, we just see them, they're just there to make fun of him, they want to take his stuff, but they don't really intend on taking this seriously. They're just kind of there to laugh at it, and Thoy eventually does calm down the crowd because he has to get to this, and he says he died a widower and that he's survived by 2 children, but for some reason Zilpha gets none of the will and testament, and I don't know if that's because she was a girl or what's really going on there, but for whatever reason, Zilpha, there's nothing for Zilpha to have. So Delaney, however, is left the only existing assets of the Delaney estate, including the Nuka trading post and landing ground on the Pacific northwest coast of the Americans, in which it was formerly Spanish America. So the crowd is obviously in an uproar, demanding Delaney to sell whatever he has, and Thoy struggles to continue. Zilpha tells Thorne that they can leave now. Thorne says they will haunt him to justice and tells him to be sure of this, that this legacy is in fact his death sentence, and Delaney then pours a bunch of coins onto Thoyd's desk and says his father's debts amount to a sum total of 215 pounds and 17 shillings, and he actually wants Thoyd to pay each and every one of them because he realizes there's a ton of money his father did not give them, and he knows that they're very eager to have this money, so he agrees to give them the money as long as they do it in an orderly fashion. And I love the way that he basically forces them to listen to him. I really did like the way that was done, and he then sees Lorna Bowe among the crowd, who in my opinion is the best female character the show has given us so far. Up to this point, every female character has been either very shallow, just there for sexual reasons, manipulated by a man. Lorna Bowe is the first one who feels like a real character. She feels like she actually has a purpose in the show. Unfortunately, she's not a main character, but I do love the direction they're taking her. So she's among the crowd who says what she's owed is not in that pile of coins since she's not on the list of final division notice, and he asks what Horace owed her. She says he owed her a lifetime of care and devotion and kisses and love in a home of fire and perhaps children someday, all that is due from a husband to a wife. Because you can clearly tell that Horace prioritized his career over everything else. He really didn't have time for his family, and that's probably one of the reasons why Zilpha resents him as much as she does. So she tells him that 2 years ago, her and Horace were married, and she has proved that she is his widow. Thoy tells her to come to his office. Him and Delaney go to her, and Thoy tells her what she gave him is an Irish document, and it may take a while to validate for that reason, and she says she can wait. Thoy says that Delaney knew nothing of the marriage, and she says that there was no way he could have since he was in Africa at the time, but assures him that Horace spoke highly of him, and Delaney asks why she went to Dublin. She says while he was on business, he says her business was there since she's an actress and appeared on stage, tells her about the program he found about the play, and Thoy says if the paper from Dublin is validated, Lorna will have a legal claim against the state as a widow, and she insists on being called Mrs. Delaney. You can tell that she very much cared for Horace, and Delaney asks if she's any good as an actress. She says Horace thought so, and Thoy asks if that was before or after he went mad. She says love is a kind of madness, and if he never experienced it, and Delaney says his father was a very sick and old man. He asks if she has any proof of consummation, and she says she has many letters proving his feelings for her. He asks if she has any other documents other than letters, and Thoit says the proof will come from pen and ink and says he will dispatch an inquiry to the church in Dublin, request a personal account from the priest, and until then he suggests to refrain from any further contact, which shouldn't be a problem because Delaney we see detests the theater and Lorna hates brothels. So these are two people who clearly are not going to ally anytime soon, but they both want very similar things. You know, they both want ownership of this will. They both feel like they need it, and honestly, you can really see where Lorna is coming from. This is someone who she knows, you know, she genuinely loved Horace, she loved who he was, even though he didn't really have time for her. She feels that that she should get the will. You know, her name is Delaney after all, and she wasn't included in it, and I'm definitely interested in seeing where her character is really going to go throughout the show. So Delaney then leaves the courthouse. He asks two men if they saw the man with the silver tooth in there, and essentially we learn that the man says he was indeed in there, and we find out that the man is actually Thorn, and I'm not all surprised about this. It seems like something the show would do, but it does seem a bit too early in the game to really make Thorn the antagonist. I mean, we saw the first episode that he absolutely despises Delaney, but having him be the man with the silver tooth just seems like a bit of a stretch. It seems like he just kind of was, so they could give Thorn something to do, since he didn't have anything else to do in this episode. But they ask if he wants to fall into the river. Delaney says the river will take him of his own accord. He goes to find Thorn, and Thoit then goes to Sir Stuart, who asks for information on Lorna, and they say nothing, and essentially they're going to try to get Lorna to get on their side, because they know that if they kill Delaney, then Lorna will get the will. So they're going to try to find a way to negotiate with Lorna to see if she possibly is willing to work with them. We'll have to see really where that's going to go, because that's going to be interesting. But then we get to the final scene, which this was definitely very interesting. I like this final scene, but at the same time, I don't know if they went a bit too far. Delaney's at a concert hall watching a man play violin. He then sees Zilpha, who he knows is with Thorn, so she goes outside. Delaney follows suit and says he missed her, couldn't bear to see her alone. She says that she's so old that she could even laugh at him, and he says yet she came outside to see him, and she says because otherwise he would have came to her with very loud declarations. He agrees he would have and asks if his loudness troubles her. She says not in the jungle or the forest. He says she used to strain her skirt and march away like nothing had ever happened. She asks who marched away and says thank God he did. She tells him this is very simple, taking away ancient history. He lives in the east, she lives in the west. There are no particular difficulties. So she wants them to stay as far away as possible, but he tells her she's forgetting about the great big river that connects them, and she asks if he really ate flesh. He says to tell her friends that she's sick and she can come and hear everything. She says she would laugh at him, but he's not well. She can't stand to have him this close to her. He says it's a shame because he will always be this close to her. She goes back inside, and I'm definitely interested in seeing where Zilpha is really going here, because it's really the first time they've actually, you know, full-on interacted. And we then see the ending, which this was interesting. An unknown assassin in just a black veil comes up to him with a knife, clearly planning on just stabbing him, but he goes to the man, bites his jugular vein, and I literally mean like he bites it and gnaws at him until he's dead. He then starts to slowly fall because he's been stabbed too with a pretty fatal gut wound. He then sees a memory of a black boy going to him. He then falls unconscious, and that is the way the episode ends. Really interesting stuff overall. Let's just get into this episode and where I think we're going to go from here. So, like I said, for me, this was a very mixed episode. There were some things that I really liked, and some things I think they could have easily saved. Like the whole thing of revealing who the man with the silver tooth was, they could have saved it. I get that they have 6 episodes left, but I think they could have easily saved it. Something I think the show is dragging out, though, however, is the whole thing with him being a slave owner, because it's really fucking obvious. I mean, so many visions of these black people chained in a cellar, and, you know, him having these visions of clearly victims that he probably did harm to. It's pretty easy to tell what's going on. What sucks, though, is that the show is not trying to spell it out for us. The show is trying to be subtle, and they're really not succeeding at all, I have to say. It's coming across as very obvious what's going on here. I get what the show's trying to do. Right now, at least, it just seems like they're just trying to, like, keep it subtle, and it really is not working. It's quite easy to tell what's going on there. But him being a cannibal, on the other hand, I don't know how I feel about that. It feels like this was just kind of here to, again, prove how tough Delaney really is. It doesn't really go with anything else we see of his character. I get why people think of him as a monster, but we see that Delaney genuinely cares for people. You know, he has this care for his family. He's a family-first kind of guy. You know, he wants the ships to stay in his family's ownership. You know, he's trading ships so he can do what he can to make sure the will stays, you know, where it rightfully owns. So that makes sense too. Now, what's going on between him and Zilpha, I don't really know. I think they're hinting at some incest between them, especially the way he said that she straightened her skirt. So I definitely think these two have either had sex or some sort of sexual relation before. So I don't know if we're going in like a Jamie Cersei type direction, but I think that's where we're headed. It very much seems like that's where it's going. I get they're half brother and sister, but at the same time, I don't know how I really feel about that. It just seems like it's kind of there to give Zilpha something to do, which Zilpha right now is just not really doing a ton for me. I think Una Chaplin's a great actress. I think she's doing a good job in the show. But it just seems like they don't know what to do with her, that she's just kind of here in Delaney's plots. And that is my biggest problem with this entire episode, is that there's just way too much Delaney. I get that Delaney's the main character, but there were way too many scenes where I think it would have made more sense and would have benefited them more if they spent more time with Sir Stewart, if they spent more time with Zilpha, if they spent more time with Grace. There's just way too much going on with just Delaney. We need more going on than that, because sure, Delaney's conflict is very interesting. What's going on with him, you know, there's a lot of stuff there that I'm definitely very fascinated with. The whole thing with Winter, first of all, is Winter actually there, or is he just crazy? Again, we don't know if Delaney's actually crazy or not. That very well could be the case, that he could be crazy, but again, we don't really know. But the show introduced some really interesting characters in this episode. Unfortunately, though, they're not main characters. Dumbarton and Lorna are both very compelling, and I'm very interested in seeing where they're both going to go, especially Dumbarton, because he has this whole other layer to the show with knowing that there are American spies, and that these American spies are there clearly to see what the British are doing, and we don't know if they've gotten into Delaney's head or not, which Sir Stewart is pretty certain that that's what's going on, and I could very well see that happening, but I definitely feel there's more going on there that we don't know, and that definitely does keep me compelled, I have to say. But there were definitely way too many scenes of Delaney rummaging through treasure, or Delaney going through this, or Delaney going through that, and it just really dragged the episode on. It didn't make the episode better. It didn't play into the episode's strengths. It just got me bored, honestly. I really got bored at those scenes, and I don't want the show to lose me, but if it keeps doing things like that, it really might, honestly. And I know, again, it's only episode 2, and I'm trying to be as generous as I can, but at the same time, yes, it's episode 2, but we only have 6 episodes left, so the show really does need to start revealing some things. The Man with the Silver Tooth, I don't really think they need to reveal in this episode. There's nothing that happened with the Man with the Silver Tooth. We know that Thorn is the one that is the Man with the Silver Tooth, but we didn't really need to know that yet. I feel like it would have made more sense to kind of wait till halfway through the series. That would have made more sense to do that than tell us in episode 2. The episode could have ended the same, and the Man with the Silver Tooth reveal would not have needed to be there. I just don't feel like that really did anything by him finding out in this episode. Also, the one line of him saying to Zilpha that, you know, him eating flesh, I feel like it would have been more of a surprise if we didn't know that he was a cannibal. Imagine how great of a surprise it would have been if we saw that he was a cannibal. How shocked we would have been. And I get why the show didn't want to do that, because clearly these two have a very big history, but I'm just interested in seeing where that's going to go, really. I think they just would have added more to the episode if we didn't know that Delaney was a cannibal. I don't know how I feel about that yet. I really don't know if I like Delaney being a cannibal, because I just don't know if it goes with the rest of his character. His character right now is kind of all over the place. Sometimes he's really genuine. He really wants to help everyone by, you know, paying debts and staying close to his family and trying to be nice to Brace and things like that. Not just treating Brace like a servant and trying to stay loyal to his army. He has a lot of very generous acts. Then he does things like eating a guy's flesh, and it just doesn't add up. It really does not. I get it that Delaney is someone who will do whatever it takes to protect his family, but those two halves do not really add up at all. At least right now they're not. Again, there's probably more going on that we still don't know about, but right now it's just really not adding up for me. But there is definitely enough compelling stuff in there to keep me watching. It's just right now, I'm very mixed with this show. I want it to be great. I really do. And the first episode was genuinely great. It's just this episode, I think, had a lot going on that really didn't need to be going on yet. Like, we didn't need to get introduced to Atticus or characters like that. We could have easily waited till, I think, episode 3 or 4. The Man with the Silver Tooth reveal didn't really need to happen, but there is still enough compelling stuff in there to keep me watching, and for that reason, I am going to give Taboo episode 2 a 3.5 out of 5 or a B. So let me know what you guys thought of the show so far. Are you enjoying it? Also, why did they change the intro? It feels really random that they did that. I get that they're going to get the original one back for episode 8, but it just felt really random that they changed the intro. I genuinely love the intro. I think it's fine the way it was. I don't know why they had to change it, but whatever. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy it. We'll see you guys in my next video, which will be for a movie review, and we'll see you guys for that. Okay, bye.